Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. My name is Samuel with Cedar Pine Designs, and in today's video I will be working on a 6-drawer mid-century dresser made by LA Period Furniture. It is a very solid piece to start with. It just has quite a bit of cosmetic damage in the finish. It will need to be stripped down and redone. It has a little bit of structural damage as well, and I'm going to be fixing that later on in the video. This piece is a very nice piece made of solid ash or maple, I believe, and I can't wait to jump straight into this project and show you the end result. So let's jump straight into it. This project, like many of my other projects, starts off the same way. I like to remove all of the drawers and all of the hardware so that way I can get a really good look at what condition this piece is in. And I like to take some TSP degreaser and really give this piece a nice once over. I typically don't like to use TSP too much anymore because it does require you to use some water to clean up the residual degreaser that leaves a slight film behind. So if you don't want to use any kind of harsh chemicals, you can just use a little bit of Dawn dish soap and some warm water and a washcloth, and you are good to go. I'm flipping this thing upside down so that way I can remove the base and all of the legs, because I do plan to sand those down to bare wood. But one of the other things that I did notice when I first purchased this piece is that the back stretcher that does hold the back legs was a little loose, and it caused the legs to sit inward at an angle, and they were pretty loose. So I'm gonna go ahead and address that by adding some screws and reinforcing it and re-gluing those corner pieces so that this piece is nice and structurally sound. After removing those corner pieces, I went ahead to remove these staples that are kind of loosely holding that base to the back of that backer board. I'm going to be replacing that with a screw, and I'm going to be using a countersink drill bit to drill a hole so that way the screw sits nice and flush, just to give it a little bit more of some structural integrity. I also decided to add some screws to the corners of the stretcher. I used the same countersink drill bit just to drill a hole, and this seemed to help a whole lot, and I think that that's where most of the strength is going to come from, to keep that base from rocking back and forth and causing the legs to point inward. One of the other areas that I noticed had some damage was one of the drawers. When I took it out, I can tell that the rail was really loose, and the only thing holding it was a little bit of glue and one small staple. So I decided to use a syringe with glue inside to glue it back down, and use some furniture nails to just secure that base to hold it in place while the wood has time to dry. After getting everything glued up and giving it time to dry, I moved on to sanding the top with a 150 grit sandpaper, but that was not going very well for me, so I moved over to my carbide scraper, and while it was pretty effective, I did notice that the top coat was really hard, and once it did decide to come off, it was very flaky, and it was just a lot of effort to try and scrape all of this top coat off, and it was getting pretty exhausting. So I moved over to a paint stripper just to try and make my life a little bit easier, but you know what they say, third time is a charm. A tip that I received in some of my previous videos in the comment section was to use plastic wrap or saran wrap over top of the premium stripper to give it time to work its way into the finish without drying out, because without the plastic it does tend to dry out and you have to keep reapplying it, and that stuff is not cheap. So after letting it sit for about 30 minutes, I attempted to scrape the finish off, and to my surprise it did not work very well. In some spots it worked better than other spots, but I was able to remove quite a bit of finish off by just using the premium stripper and a scraper. I'm using mineral spirits to deactivate the stripper so that way I can wipe it down and let it dry out a little bit. But I kind of gave up on the stripper. I didn't want to do multiple coats and multiple scraping with the scraper, so I decided to move back to the carbide scraper, and it actually worked really well because the finish was softened up from the premium wood stripper. And then I moved on to the sides and just decided I'm going to scrape the entire thing because it's the fastest way, and sanding was just going to take way too long. After fighting with that top for quite a while, I moved on to the drawers, removed all of the handles, and I used 150 grit sandpaper to strip those down to bare wood. And after the top had about 24 hours to dry, I came back the next day to finish sanding that with 150 grit sandpaper down to bare wood. And luckily, this is made of solid wood, it's not a veneer, so I'm able to sand it nice and flat and get any of the imperfections out. And there's these detailed sections in the front that I had to use some hand sanding, but in the end it all worked out, and I finally was able to get all of that finish off of the body, and all that was left was the legs and the stretcher that mounts to the front. Now that the entire body and legs were done of all the sanding, I moved on to the 3 big drawers, and because there wasn't really a good way to get the finish out of where the inset handle goes, I decided to pull out my sandblaster and make quick work of removing that finish. I couldn't get a better angle because that thing does kick up a lot of dust, so that's pretty much all the footage I can get. Then I move on to using some wood stain conditioner so that I can get a good idea of what color this wood is going to be if I decided to put a natural finish on it. And I really like the tone that this wood has right now, but at this point in the project I was still unclear with what direction I was going to go with the finish. After having some time to think about how I wanted to finish this piece, I decided to go with a polyurethane and stain combo. It is water-based and it acts as a toner that is built into your top coat. I'm going to use this to bring back some of that rich reddish orange color because the finish seems a little bare and a little light for what I picture that I wanted it to be in my head. So the more you layer this stuff up, the darker and richer that it gets. And as you can tell from this shot right here, it did give it a nice richer color. And like I said, the more you put, the more you can manipulate the color. And I'm pretty happy with the way it started to turn out, but I decided that it's going to need 2 coats. So I used 400 grit sandpaper to lightly scuff up the surface so I can get it nice and smooth, and also give that second layer something nice to bond to. Once I applied the second coat, I was really happy with the way that it turned out. I didn't really like how uneven the first coat came out because with this stuff you want to kind of spray a little bit lighter rather than heavier so that way you can work up to the color that you want. And then I moved on to the smaller drawers, removing all of the rest of the hardware and scuff sanding them because I had an idea for a little bit of contrast, and you'll see that later on in the video. I then moved on to waxing the drawers while everything was taking its time to dry. I'm using Dixie Belle's Big Mama's Butter. This stuff smells amazing, and it is a really good product if you want to recondition your wood and really richen it and bring it back to life. When trying to decide how I was going to create some contrast into this piece, I remembered that I had some Dixie Belle paint called Black Sands, and I really wanted to use this paint, and I also wanted to create some contrast, so I used all of the 3 smaller drawers as accent drawers, so that way I can break up the color on the piece and give it just a little something different. And as you can see, this is the way that it turned out, and after having some time to think about it, I really didn't like the way that orange color was kind of clashing with the paint, and it turned out more navy than I thought it was going to be, and I thought it was going to be black. So I decided to start over and strip everything back down to bare wood, at least for the time being. I started with the top, and this is a great example of what I say, that you don't always have to finish everything in its original state because paint toner, top coats, it all comes off really easy. As you can tell, this top coat that I had put on comes off easier than the original top coat. And if somebody was to ever want to restore this back to the original look, it can all be stripped down very easy, and this is a perfect example of that. So after a lot of fighting with this project to kind of get it to where I wanted it to be, I decided that the top I was going to keep in its most natural form, which was a very light raw wood color, and I decided to just put a couple of coats of polyurethane on the top of that, along with the legs and the stretcher on the bottom, because I wanted to keep some wood aspects. And I also decided to paint the rest of the body and the bigger drawers the same color as the small drawer. And I have to say, you would need to come to your own conclusion later on in the video, but I can say that I think it was the best choice that I could have made for this piece by ditching that orange color and just getting rid of it altogether. Once I was done painting, I decided to move on to installing the legs and the stretcher in the front, so that way I can get this thing on its feet and see how it's actually going to turn out, because I'm still a little unsure how it's going to look until it's all put together. So I reinstalled the stretcher, and if you remember earlier in the video, it had a really big bow to it, so all I did was correct it and screw it down so that way it's nice and straight. And I move on to all the hardware. I did buy new hardware for the smaller drawers because they were missing, and I couldn't replace the bigger ones because they're very unique, and I wouldn't ever be able to find anything to replace those. And because the new ones came in a brass color, I decided to just paint them all like a metallic gold color, so that way everything's nice and cohesive and matching. After this project had tested my patience on multiple occasions, it was time to get to my favorite part, and that's reinstalling all of the hardware, because that means now I get to wax all of the drawers so that way everything slides nice and smooth and you won't have any issues with binding on the wood, and I can reinstall all the drawers, and I can finally take a step back and see what all of my hard work has paid off. And check this piece out. I am definitely happy with the end result. I am also glad that I made the decision to get rid of that orange color and just paint everything the way that it is now. I really like the color, the Black Sands by Dixie Belle. It is more of a navy, but a soft navy, and I'm absolutely loving it. So for this one, I actually can't really detail the numbers because I don't remember how much I paid for it. I've actually had it in a storage unit for a pretty long time. I know I picked it up from the San Francisco area, and I'm pretty sure I paid $100 or less. That's typically what I try to spend. My last video, I did have a 9-drawer mid-century dresser that did end up selling for the full price of $700, so I am thankful for that. And I really appreciate everybody sticking around to the end of this video, and I can't wait to see you on the next one.